Right, this is the last treatment of depression, and it's CBT. Obviously, there's not been a mark scheme on this, so these are just my notes, and you're going to have to fill them in, guys. So remember, CBT, or cognitive, assumes that depression is caused by faulty thinking. So the way to cure depression is to change that faulty thinking. So this is a directed therapy with you and a therapist. It goes on for about 6 to 20 sessions, depending on how serious it is and things, and involves both cognitive and behavioural aspects to your treatment. It looks at both kind of factors involved, or uses both approaches to kind of cure you. So the role of the therapist throughout all of these sessions is to help you restructure your thoughts and to teach you the skills to cope with them. So for example, remember, we normally would start off by setting a frame of reference. There's the two ways of doing this. We've got Johari window. Again, so remember, you're given a list of words and you need to select you and your friends or you and your family, and you pick the words that apply to you. So you're able to see kind of what you're aware of and what you're not aware of. If your friends have highlighted negative qualities about you that you haven't, it means that it's a blind spot that you're not aware of and you need to change. But also vice versa with positive qualities. Your friends might not be, your friends might be aware of positive qualities that you don't see in yourself, or vice versa. You might consider yourself to have lots of positive qualities, but you don't show them enough. So by pointing out these things, it gives us something to work on. Or you remember, we also have that kind of downward arrow technique that's in your textbook, where we keep going through and cutting to the underlying cause till we get to a basic schema. So you and your boyfriend split up, and what we do is, instead of dealing with that, we look at it and say, why did you split up? Okay, now why did that happen? And why do you feel like that? And so what makes you think that? Till eventually you go all the way down and you get a basic statement, something that we can combat. So perhaps you feel like you don't deserve love, or whatever it happens to be. So we look at that and we use that to kind of build a structure to look at your thoughts and feelings further. So CBT involves generally 5 stages. So you will monitor your negative thoughts, and what we try to do is help raise the connection between these thoughts and your mood. And then it's up to the client and the therapist in the meetings to sit down and try to pull these things apart. This is called the thought catching. So what might happen is the therapist in the sessions will talk to you about the thoughts that you can remember, and they might actually set you a task of kind of actually going away and writing down negative thoughts as they happen. So in a lesson where you think that you can't do something, you make a note of it. And what the therapist helps you do is challenge those thoughts. So they will look at logical disputing, empirical disputing, and pragmatic disputing. These, by the way, you're meant to draw lines between them again. So logical disputing is going, does that make sense? Empirical disputing, have you got any evidence for this, or have you just jumped to a conclusion? And pragmatic disputing, what I constantly do with you, where we go, right, is that going to be helpful though? Having that thought stops you doing work when you need to be doing work. So put that out of your mind and keep going. So it helps by disrupting all these thoughts and by disputing them. It helps you get to more positive attitudes and behaviours, and teaches you kind of thinking skills. There's also behaviour activation, where you might be given a task or a challenge to do, such as, in this case by Babiak, they asked them to go and do more exercise. That's all I can really tell you about CBT at the moment. It's not been up in the exam, but that should be more than enough for you to kind of cover it. So as it's not been up, there's also been no evaluation, but we can evaluate this, no problem. First off, obviously, we've got studies that show that it works. I will get those studies. Studies that show that it works. First off, Koiken. So I'll change these colours. I'll put all these back to white. This was still from the drug treatment. We'll ignore that bit in red there. So Koiken, whereas before it was against drug therapy, it's now for CBT, as is Ellis. Remember though, the alternative to Koiken is Carp and Frank. So Koiken says that CBT works better than drug treatment, whereas Koiken says that all of the benefits we see with CBT are actually due to drugs. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you were on drugs and CBT or just drugs by themselves. people got better at the same kind of rate. So therefore, CBT actually added nothing to the treatment. And we can also talk about other general evaluation points. So that's the supporting and conflicting. We've got other explanations or other treatments, so we can use dreams or drugs to talk about that. When we come to usefulness, we can compare this. Remember, all of these treatments, all of these therapies, you need to be able to compare them together. We haven't focused a lot on comparison, but you need to be able to do it. So we can talk about the usefulness. We can talk about how this is long-lasting because they teach you a skill. We can talk about how it's hard to measure. It takes great motivation. If you haven't got that, as many depressed people don't have, which is what Stiles says. Stiles says that motivation is needed, which is exactly what depressed people are missing. So it might not work so well for depressed people. Yeah, so you need motivation for it to work, and that might be hard to get. It takes a great deal of time, money, effort. You need to have so much kind of self-reflection. You have to have that skill of reflecting on yourself. What else? Sorry, it's hard to measure. Again, you have to be motivated. That really, obviously, I'll give you 4 points there. I'm trying to think of what other ones we can mention. It's a talking therapy. It relies possibly on interpretation. Things like that. Not so much as dream analysis, though. We can talk about the testability of this again. It's difficult to measure, and we can't see thoughts. The same as kind of the explanation of cognitive. We'll look at this a bit more in the lesson. I think CBT is something that we need to work on the evaluation, but these are kind of basic points we can look at. And that should really cover us, especially if you go strongly on kind of comparison. If you can give me a couple of comparisons about how this deals with, for example, another comparison, is this argues that it deals with the actual cause. Yeah, so if it deals with the cause, whereas drugs just mask the symptoms. So this makes that one better than drugs, and so on. So that's the entire first kind of half of the paper. And what I'm going to try and do now is also cover the contributions to society or to psychology from the different approaches. So remember, you need to know contributions from both crime and child. So just on the screen are the contributions of crime. I won't go into it too much because we've done this. You had an exam on it last week. It's basic things that you know. So again, it helps us understand the reliability of eyewitness testimony. It helps us come up with cognitive interviews. We can use offender profiling. It helps us explain why people are criminals. We can use token economy. We can use anger management. Any of that is a contribution of crime. Know 2 or 3 of them, know them, and you should be okay. Remember, we're talking about probably 2 or 3 marks for each one. You're not going into massive amounts of detail. If you look at this blurb by Loftus, that's worth 2 marks. Yeah, you're just outlining what it said, how it found it, whatever it is. The key bit you're going for is showing your understanding. The same thing for child. So in child, we know about what we should be doing in hospitals. We know about how social services should try to keep parents together. We know how to improve daycare. We know the best way to interact with kids with autism or how to explain autism to parents. And we know how to recover from privation, or we've studied privation and explain that. Whatever it happens to be. Yeah, you just need to know a couple of these things so that you can describe them when it asks for a contribution from either child or crime. Or might ask for a couple. You need to be outlining these things in basic detail. You can use the studies that you can remember. It's not really that hard of taxing, so I won't spend long on it. It would be good probably though if you could practice writing a couple of paragraphs on these, just so you can kind of get into the habit of being short with it. It's not like a big 6-mark question just for one thing usually. You also need to know, remember, practical or contributions from each of the approaches. So we've got cognitive learning, psychodynamic, biological, and so on. If you know 2 or 3 from each approach, you are absolutely laughing, I can tell you. So most of them we can cover. Yet be smart in what you pick. Do the things that we've already done in Unit 3 and Unit 4. Only go to ES if you feel confident or if you're capable. So cognitive, we can talk about CBT, reliability of eyewitness testimony, cognitive interviews, how it explains depression, things like that. We can use the stuff you've already got. Again, each one of these would be maybe 2-3 marks, something like that. You've got this covered. Again, learning explanations, we can use token economies. We can talk about how it explains gender, how it explains crime, how it explains anorexia. All of these using social learning theory. We can talk about aversion therapy and how it's used to cure alcoholics or drug addicts, things like that. Psychodynamic, again, we're talking about dream therapy, gender, how it cured Hans and his phobias, again, a therapy. It's got its contributions that we can talk about. Biological, we can talk about drugs, gender, we can explain crime using Eysenck or RAIN. I'll include RAIN there. It explains mental illness, again, in both depression and schizophrenia, and again, the treatments that come from that. And social explanations, again, it explains why people commit crimes, it explains why people commit atrocities in war, it explains prejudice. We can look at community therapy and how it explains different rates of people that have schizophrenia. All of these things, it shouldn't be hard for you. All of you can do this. I fully believe that. We can also, you need to know from these different approaches, you need to know things like their beliefs, so kind of the underlying assumptions. And again, there's something I can't really help you. I can't go through every single thing. We need general theories. You need to have a passing knowledge of some of them so that you can talk about them. So you've got the 18 mark questions where you looked at the things like explain why people are stealing from this ship, or explain how harm is done in society. You can use stuff from the ES like Milgram and Tajfel and social identity theory and things. Or you can also really hammer the stuff from here too. For those sort of questions, you could talk about affectionate psychopaths. You could talk about social learning theory and crime. I'm trying to think of any questions where you were forced to use ES stuff. The only question was the approach, and again, it ties into what did each one believe. There was a question asking you to use psychodynamic explanations of human behaviour, and then evaluate it in the terms of is it scientific. So it was only 6 marks for description. So that's all the stuff about the unconscious, the id, ego, and superego, the psychosexual stages, the Oedipus complex, and defense mechanisms. You could have used any of that stuff within that 6 marks, and even used Bowlby. So again, if you know kind of 6 marks on any of the approaches, and that can include anything from AS or A2, so social learning theory, whatever. That should be okay for each of the kind of the approaches. Remember, you also need to know your practical. So your practical from Unit 4 is the unipolar depression leaflet. So you need to know who your target audience was, how you found the information, why you selected that information to go into it, what was the purpose of your leaflet. We went over that. Again, I'm happy to go over it again if you want. But you'll find the questions in the mark scheme with the marks, and key for this one, they give you actual examples of what you could say. Although I think theirs was about anorexia. I'm going to do one more video. I think I'm going to try and get through all the synoptic elements in one video, and then I'll try and throw in a few miscellaneous things in the end of it. If not, I'll try to do it in kind of another video that'll only be a couple of minutes. Right, so that's done.